Wouldn't we all like to know just how to maximise not just our health but our performance as we age? If you're greater than 35 years, you are by definition a masters athlete. If you're less than 35 years, do not tune out. On today's expert edition, Professor Peter Reaburn shares the collective wisdom he's learned from a 30-year plus academic career on the very topic of getting the most out of the masters athlete.
G'day folks, it's Professor Peter Reaburn here. I'm the Head of Exercise and Sports Science at Bond University, an active masters athlete researcher, passionate educator and passionate believer in bringing the value of sports science to the real world, and it's great to be a part of the Physical Performance Show.
And the winner is...
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Kinesis Sunscreen and Pogo Physio. I'm Brad Beer, sports physiotherapist and exercise scientist by trade and training, and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week, we'll bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration designed to help you perform at your physical best. Of course, we do this across a range of different episodes, coaches' corners, interest editions, featured performers, and expert editions. And on today's episode, Professor Peter Reaburn takes us deep into the science and the practicalities of maximising not only the health but the performance of the masters athlete. Professor Peter Reaburn is the head of program of Bond University's Institute of Sport and Health on the Gold Coast, Australia. Professor Reaburn currently supervises 5 PhD projects related to both the applied sports science and health and performance and recovery of masters athletes. He's currently on the editorial panel for the European Review of Aging and Physical Activity and was previously a member of the Exercise and Sports Science Australia's National University Course Accreditation program. Peter himself is a highly accomplished athlete, a former national champion in surf lifesaving, a masters national Ironman Triathlon Champion, avid road cyclist, multi-gold medalist at the Australian Surf Lifesaving Masters titles, and record holder in the big swim in Sydney with 3 national records in Masters swimming to boot. And coming off the back of last week's featured performer, episode 214, 47-year-old professional Ironman triathlete Cam Brown, this is a great follow-up as an expert edition to dive into the science of how to get the most out of our aging bodies. Today we explore what the definition is of successful aging, what's behind the rise we see in prominent masters athletic success. We explore the physiological changes that occur as we mature. We discuss some very interesting scientific findings that show that masters athletes physiologically recover at a similar rate to younger athletes. However, their perception is that they recover in a poorer fashion. We speak about protein synthesis rates, the role of strength training, thermal tolerance and heat adaptation of the masters athlete, the top mistakes that masters athletes are making, and so much more. Here is my conversation on this expert edition of the Physical Performance Show with Professor Peter Reaburn on all things maximising the health and performance of the masters athlete. Professor Peter Reaburn, this is a real thrill and honour. This is a topic we've been wanting to explore for some time, the health and performance of the masters athlete. We've covered it in ways through a running perspective, formerly with Rich Willie. However, your academic background, your mix of your own athleticism and your PhD experience, I think is going to add a whole other layer. So welcome to the Physical Performance Show.
An absolute pleasure to be invited, Brad, and to be a part of it.
Your biography. It's layered with sporting achievements from Masters national medals in the surf lifesaving, cycling, triathlon, swimming records, and then your academic record. It's also littered with achievements. So how did this interest in the Masters athlete for you, Peter, begin?
Great question, Brad. And, I'm now 65 years young, and I've had a lifetime of engagement with sport. It started as a 10-year-old boy on the Gold Coast here, the surf, swimming and rugby union through school, and just realised I had a bit of an aptitude for it, and it helped shape me as a person. And I realised the importance then of the role of sport in developing people, not only physically and health-wise, but also as a person. It became a huge part of my life, which I then turned into a physical education degree through university, taught physical education for 7 years, and then realised I need to get my brain going more, and I went back and completed a PhD at the University of Queensland in specifically focused on why are athletes, as they're getting older, getting slower, and looking at the actual reasons for it, cardiovascularly, musculoskeletally, and then just became an academic and with a strong interest in the ageing athlete or the Masters athlete as a research area, and have had the pleasure of working with some wonderful postgraduates who have done most of the work that I've come up with the research questions around, but all focused on ageing healthily and actively.
So the question I have would be, Peter, when you're at university, you did your undergraduate degree in physical education. At that stage, you weren't a Masters ageing athlete. I mean, we're all ageing, but you weren't a Masters athlete. So what piqued the interest to spend the next circa 4 years of your life head down in a PhD around the ageing athlete and the changes?
Yeah, great question again, Brad. I really value the depth of question. As a young surf lifesaver at Southport Surf Club here on the Gold Coast, I was strongly influenced by older athletes that were in their late 20s and into their 30s that were still competing at the highest level. Guys like Greg Rodan, who became an international level triathlete, Tommy Regan, a ski paddler. There are just so many guys that I was fascinated that when they were old, late 20s and early 30s, were still competing in open competition. And I was the young buck, sort of 18 to 21 years of age, thinking these guys are mixing it with me. How can that be when they're old, in inverted commas? So that I've always had a lot of respect for age and the experience that brings, and in particular older athletes that have still got that passion for training hard and competing hard into older age. So I suppose that's what started it.
So you were surrounded by athletes that you respected and admired in some sense, and that spawned the interest. But it's interesting, where do you think your respect for age came from? Because I think there's a societal shift towards acceptance, definitely in the sporting world. But that's, was it just your parents' good values? Peter, you must respect your elders.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. My mother was a feminist before her time. My father was a general practitioner and really hard worker. He, in the early boom days of running in the 70s, the Jim Fix days, started running marathons. And, I'm thinking, gee, Dad's old, he's in his 40s and he's starting to run. And I suppose, good role models as parents. And I suppose as I've gotten older, I've realised I'm a bit of an old soul. I'm not a spiritual man by any means, but I've always respected people that have a zest for life in older age, whether it be physically as an athlete or socially or just positive outlook on life. I've just always respected people like that.
So what did you find through your PhD about the ageing and slowing athlete?
Probably two critical things. 4 years of my life for two critical things. But number one was that there is a significant decrease in muscle mass as we get older. And we observed that by getting a group of older distance runners. I call them lifetime runners. And also there was endurance athletes and a group of older lifetime sprint runners, very rare group of animals. And we training matched, training volume matched, training intensity matched, and body weight matched with young, similarly trained athletes. And, we found a significant decrease in muscle mass, which, as you'll appreciate, contributed to a decrease in strength. And in older endurance athletes, we found a decrease in the maximum heart rate, which is age-related and we can't do a bloody thing about it, was the major means by which endurance decreased, their endurance capacities decreased. So they were probably the two big findings.
And it's interesting because in many ways you'd expect or assume that you'd come out with something like that, but the science still has to be done, right?
Exactly right, Brad. And I am a big believer that, coaches and athletes are probably common sense-wise and experience-wise know why these decreases are occurring. Critically, with the decrease in muscle mass, we then did a muscle biopsy and found that it was the type 2 muscle fibre, the fast-twitch muscle fibre, that decreased in size. And that would suggest, on the old, fibre recruitment theory, when fast-twitch muscle fibres are recruited with high-intensity exercise, that weight training might be able to assist us there and higher intensity training might be able to assist us there.
I mean, if you fast forward from your PhD days to, your current academic tenure, it's fairly well absorbed and adopted, isn't it, that strength and conditioning work is just key for really anyone that's breathing.
And as you know, and most of our listeners would know, resistance training, whether it be body weight or whether it be in the gym, anything where we resist the muscles and overload the muscles is going to lead to positive changes. And increasingly now, and definitively now, we've known for a long time that speed athletes need weight training, but we now know through a lot of research, primarily from a guy called Ronestad in Scandinavia, that weight training, including heavyweight training, in a periodised way, leads to improvements in endurance performance. I've extrapolated that in older athletes, based on their decrease in muscle mass, that it's even more important for older athletes to help maintain speed and not have the decrease in speed be as great by not doing weight training. And we've also now conclusively shown about 3 years ago through a big PhD study by one of my PhD guys called Luke Del Vecchio, that in older cyclists that we get an improvement in speed and maintenance of endurance by dropping 2 of their road cycling training sessions and having it as resistance training sessions. They can maintain their endurance and improve their speed. A great win for a road cyclist.
I feel like you may have just been sitting in the consultation room before we started to record this episode, Peter, because I actually just said to a master's-aged runner with a bone stress injury, if we could replace 2 of your sessions with 2 gym sessions, you'd most likely be far better off, not just from an injury prevention point of view, but also performance perspective. So there you go. The science says it. That's brilliant. Let's get clear, Peter, if we can, on the definition of a master's athlete. I think people just probably intuitively go, oh, well, really 40 plus. But from an academic point of view, what would you define one as?
Well, we in any of our research, we operationally define a master's athlete is an athlete over the age of 35 years who systematically trains and competes in events for older athletes. But as we all know, in swimming, as just one example. It varies from sport to sport, but swimming internationally has masters at 25 years of age. In Australia, a masters swimmer can be 20 years of age. So it varies from sport to sport, country to country, but we operationally define it as 35 years and someone who trains systematically.
Systematically training, noted. Peter, we touched on it briefly a moment ago, but this shift in acceptance of the maturing, aging masters athlete, we're seeing it with the likes of Kelly Slater at 47, still being highly competitive on the World Surfing League. I think in running terms, which is the world I'm quite comfortable with, of Bernard Lagat at 45, at 43 42 I think he was at the time, making his 5th Olympic Games team, and then one of his countrymen, Abdi Ibrahim, just running 3rd in the US Olympic trials at 45 years of age on the day. So, we see these high-profile examples, but what do you think's driving this shift in acceptance and, of these athletes now?
I think there's a number of factors, Brad. Primarily, I think increasingly the general community, which is our audience here, has got a much greater appreciation of the value of exercise as medicine. That's another one of my on my hobby horse things, apart from staying active as an athlete, is the value of exercise is medicine. And I don't need to go into all the literature. All our readers and listeners know how important exercise into older age is for not only longevity, that is quantity of life, but also quality of life. We know by research, and one of my PhD students has published extensively in this space, that people that are engaged with sport into older age more successfully. And that is not only physically, heart disease, less risk factors, etc., diabetes control, obesity control, etc., but socially are more engaged, cognitively, ability to make decisions and think quickly, more enhanced, and also psychologically, anxiety, depression, etc., far healthier by being engaged with sport. So I think that's one factor. I also think that sports at a state, national, international level are embracing older athletes and what they can bring, that experience and knowledge they can bring. But critically, I also think that sports science and your profession, physiotherapy, is helping athletes knowledge to be able to maintain high-intensity training without injury by training smarter and therefore being able to perform for longer.
So there's a few facets there, and they, it all makes sense. The value of exercise as medicine, the general acceptance of trying to age more successfully, and we've got these great role models that show us, like Kelly Slater, that it's possible. And then, as you say, Peter, that there's help available to steer people towards making wise decisions. And the thing that I find often quite, in my professional work, Peter, very satisfying, but also at times surprising, is just the power of reassurance that, hey, you're safe to keep pushing yourself. You're safe to keep going. In fact, it's favourable that you keep running for the health of your knees and your hips.
Oh, I agree, Brad. And I think, historically, when I was a younger man, the thing that you did when you were old, in your 40s, you put on a white hat and a white shirt and white pants and you played lawn bowls. That was what you did when you got older. You didn't keep running. You didn't keep cycling. You didn't keep triathloning, surf lifesaving. But I also think sports have embraced older athletes and creating opportunities through Masters Games, through Masters Championships. Those athletes like myself and yourself that want to keep competing at a high level into older age for all the benefits we've just talked about.
Yeah, no, beautiful. The embracing of the Masters athlete by sports. In running, Peter, the average median age, or the median age of runners, has increased by circa 5 years over about a 30 to 40 year period. And so it's great to see that these trends are very real. Things like parkrun, like you said, is a great example of acceptance of people of any age
Exactly right. And I, at Main Beach, where I live on the Gold Coast, the park run every Saturday morning at 7 o'clock, wherever you are in the world. It's just wonderful when I these days walk or jog slowly past there or ride my bike. I see hundreds and hundreds of older people there for all the benefits and reasons that we've just discussed.
Peter, what's your definition of successfully aging? Before we look at some of the physiological changes to the maturing body, what's your definition of successfully aging?
Yeah, it's some people call it active aging, some people call it many different terms. But for me, it's aging well in the areas of physical, social, cognitive, and psychological. Aging successfully across all of those 4 different domains is ideally what we should be shooting for. That balance between. When I was a young man, it was all about the physical. If you did the physical, you'd be right. But as I've gotten older, I appreciate the value of social interaction, of keeping my mind stimulated, of that balance of in terms of anxiety and depression. And I know from personal experience the value to my mental health of getting my exercise, particularly at the end of the day after a stressful work day.
So I think that's a nice, well-rounded perspective. It's not just about the physical. There's the social, cognitive, and psychological aspects to it as well. And we're recording through the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and more than ever, I feel it's paramount that people are able to get out there and exercise for their psychological well-being, not just their physical.
And the research strongly supports that, Brad, not just in older people who are active, as in going for a walk, but in older athletes. One of my PhD students, David Geard, Geard, I encourage people to look up some of his work. He's shown that in older athletes, the same occurs. Older athletes have much better scores in each of those 4 domains than non-athletes. And again, it's unless they're predisposed because they're involved with sport, they've got strengths in all those 4 domains. But we believe that by being engaged in sport, you're socially interacting through training and competing, you're getting that psychological relaxation that we all know as athletes we get, and cognitively you're having to concentrate when you're out exercising, and you also get these obvious physical benefits as well.
Yeah, so there's a compelling case, and the science backs it up, and I think people intuitively know it, but it's just so nice to hear some of these things. Peter, what physiological changes do occur? So, you mentioned a couple there from your PhD work prior about, the type 2 muscle fibres reducing in size and decreasing muscle mass and therefore strength. What other changes occur in the maturing masters athlete?
Yeah, and very sadly, Brad, it's all bad news. And in some cases, very little we can do about it. And I know we're talking to coaches, athletes here, and allied health professionals. So, we mentioned earlier about that decrease in muscle mass. That is a major contributor to strength and power, and therefore sport performance, particularly in speed and power athletes. We do know that in endurance athletes, those same decreases occur in musculoskeletal area, but also cardiovascularly. If we look at the classic what's called the Fick equation, or the modified Fick equation, FICK, where we know that the maximum heart rate, maximum cardiac output, that is how much blood's pumped per beat, which is a function of how many beats per minute, and also the stroke volume, how much blood per beat. That determines how much blood gets down to let's talk running here, the running muscles. The other major factor in the Fick equation is how much oxygen can be extracted from the blood that arrives in the arteries, extracted by the working muscles. Now, in older athletes, that extraction capacity appears to be maintained. There's a little bit of debate whether the stroke volume or the amount of blood pumped per beat decreases. The consensus would be in older athletes it appears to be maintained, but the decrease in maximum heart rate seems to be age related, and there's nothing we can do about it. So that, for me, is saying that the major contributor in older endurance athletes seems to be inevitable, except that a lot of research is showing that intensity of training in general in older athletes tends to decrease. And we're talking not just running speed, but we're talking, let's talk rating of perceived exertion, that older athletes tend to train with less intensity and move more towards distance and going longer than going harder. Now, research, and it's running-related research, has shown that the decrease in performance and decrease in VO2 max is less in athletes that have maintained intensity of training. So it's the more intense training athlete into older age that appears to be able to hold on to performance, which is a big argument, and it's one of my take-home messages, that there is a role for intensity of training in the older athlete. But I know later we might talk about a bit of a caveat around that, because research is also showing that older athletes are trained hard, often over many years, are more at risk of cardiac issues. And that's a relatively new research finding.
And I might even suggest let's go there now, because it's kind of a nice juxtaposition to that, as to what physiological changes do occur. The heart rate max decreases, and I'm looking at just a bit of literature on the side of my desk here that says it's at about 3.2% per decade. Then, as you said, the stroke volume, or the ability of the pump to get the blood out, sort of maybe doesn't shift if you're keeping the intensity in your training. The ability to get the oxygen out of the system doesn't change, but that drop in heart rate max does affect it. And it makes me think, Peter, of someone like some of these elite runners who are clearly having reductions in maximum heart rate over the decades. Paula Radcliffe, who's still ran that just beaten world marathon record in her well and truly in her 30s, and it makes sense. Her VO2, her maximum heart rate was less than a decade prior, but the intensity of training stayed there. You were agreeing there with Paula Radcliffe, right?
Mate, I've followed her for many, many years, and you'd be the same. Any of these extraordinary breakthrough athletes, whether they're young or older, I've seen her race, I've seen her train on YouTube clips. I think Paula Radcliffe would be a classic example of someone who knows how to hurt. How she can push herself for so long, so hard in an event is extraordinary. You just have to look at her technique and her face when she's racing. But some research has shown that older athletes, let's take her as an example, that they tend to be very good. Paula Radcliffe's probably not a good example because of the way she runs, but they're very economical. They're very economical. They tend to, their economy when they're running, and research has conclusively shown this, that older athletes are far more economical, and they typically can run at I'm talking old school maybe, their threshold as a percentage of their VO2 max is significantly higher than a younger athlete's percentage of VO2 max at threshold. Now, that's probably economy related, but also experience related. They know how to pace themselves and run economically. So, yeah, I think there's older athletes can run far more economically, and they can run at a higher percentage of their VO2, but they need to have trained that capacity.
So if someone's listening in and they're realising that maybe they need to add some intensity in to try and starve off some of these age-related changes that will affect performance, but then they've also heard you note, and they've seen publicised cases that they tend to make the news of masters athletes running into cardiovascular ailments. What's the academics world latest sort of synopsis of the risk of a lifetime of endurance athlete on cardiovascular health?
A lifetime endurance athlete's risk is higher in terms of cardiac issues. That your normal training, your normal aging masters athlete, less so. But the research, a gentleman called Ish Vogels, another Scandinavian, they're always leading the way in this space, has conclusively shown that older competitive athletes who have trained hard for many, many years, regularly trained hard at a high intensity, are the most at risk of, it appears to be particularly atrial fibrillation, but also cardiac issues. What I've picked up from reading this, because I've seen some of my elders, 10 years older, I look up to them, as I mentioned earlier. I've seen them now with pacemakers suffering atrial fibrillation. So I've looked into this fairly extensively. These days, as an older athlete, I do have that background of training hard, often over many years, competing at a high level. I tend to train less often at threshold or above. And when I do train, I tend to do intervals. So rather than, let's just take, in the old days, I might do a 5 or 10K threshold run. What I would move to these days would be to doing intervals maybe once a week. So I might do a track session of, 10 400-metre runs with a jog recovery. So I'm not flogging myself for a long period of time. I'm doing intervals. And I think, I'm a big no one's definitively said this, but here I am sitting between sports science and the real world. One of my take-home messages would be that intervals done not as often as they would have been done as a younger athlete would be recommended for older athletes.
Okay, the power of intervals. And, so in other words, prior expert edition guest, one of your academic colleagues, Stephen Seiler, who we were working in conjunction with Bond University, where you currently are sitting, to bring Stephen down under in July prior to COVID. In other words, you've really adopted the polarised training approach.
And you're right, Brad, and the polarised training approach has been shown to work with really experienced elite young athletes. I would argue in the older athlete, that polarised approach of LSD, long, slow distance, and then hits with high intensity is one of the keys for the older athlete, the older endurance athlete.
And avoiding, or being cautious, I should say, not necessarily avoiding, but less time spent in the middle at threshold, where we often fall to because we're too tired to make it count, because we're too tired to go hard and we're too impatient to go really slow. Exactly right.
And if we're not running with good technique and we're doing too much of it, we put ourselves at risk of not only musculoskeletal injury, but based on what we just talked earlier, of cardiac injury.
And I guess the question, and it's a case-by-case example, is, to not be afraid of going long, but the reality is no one knows the dose per individual that either puts them at risk or is, the sweet spot of long stuff, right?
We'd make a fortune, Brad, you and I, if we could come up with a pill that came out with that magic pill for the exact load that every athlete needs. And it's a key point, the ability to listen to your body, learn from your elders, learn over the years what works for me.
And what I really appreciate from you saying that, Professor Peter, is here you are in the highest highs of the academic world, but you're bringing it back to the basics, which seems to be a common theme. Listen to your body.
Absolutely, and Brad, and I know you may ask me a question at the end on what's the take-home message. It would be listen to your body. Know what works for you. And most older endurance athletes, sprint athletes, will know what works for them.
Listen to your body. It talks. It never lies, does it? Peter, interested in so we've covered some physiological changes. I mean, we haven't touched on bone health. Is there anything you want to throw in around the changes to bone, Peter, for the maturing masters athlete?
Yeah, there is no doubt, particularly in menopausal, postmenopausal women. We know it's an issue, but it's also an issue in older men as well, particularly in non-weight-bearing athletes. So we're talking cyclists here, we're talking rowers, swimmers. That the need, both male and female, for some impact, some stress on the bones. And we know that walking, weight training, light plyometrics, skipping, light jumping is going to have those impacts. Yeah, bone health, Brad. Again, another one of my PhD students has looked at that and is currently still looking at that. The importance in the older athlete of some impact on bones.
You can't go wrong getting strong, and from a physio point of view, it's if we want to try and help bone health on a non-medication front, which sometimes is still required, then lifting heavy, staying strong. And
the beauty of let's think about this logically. If we're lifting heavy, we're pulling on the ends of bones where the muscles are attached. That has been shown to positively impact on bone health.
Beautiful. So if anyone listening isn't yet a convert to strength and conditioning, I think there's some good points being made here. But Peter, the perceptions about I was interested through a paper you're involved with over your academic career. I believe there was a paper that you outputted at some point regarding the perception of the masters athlete and their perception of how tired and fatigued they were, muscular soreness, etc., was very much a factor on how well they did or didn't recover. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, Brad, and indeed we've done 2 studies related to that. One was in 2008. I'm very proud of my PhD students, but a guy called Jimmy Fell, who ended up lecturing at the University of Tasmania and becoming a leader down there in applied sports science and healthy ageing. I love it when my postgrads are giving back. Jimmy did his PhD in veteran cyclists, and he was particularly interested in physiological and perceptual markers of recovery. So we had a group of veteran cyclists, all just into their 50s, and we had them do 30-minute time trials over 3 consecutive days on the bike. And young athletes also did the same. And we found that their ability to physiologically recover was similar to the younger athletes, but their perception of recovery was reduced. That is, they thought they hadn't recovered and they felt they were sorer than the young athletes on a 1 to 10 scale. So then, it was 4 years ago, we did a similar study on runners. So they were triathletes, and we had them run downhill on consecutive days. And this is, Brad, where we use protein to impact on their recovery, positively, I need to say. But, yeah, we found in the runners their soreness and their perceptions of recovery after downhill running compared to young athletes, again, showed that they perceived they took longer to recover and they perceived they were sorer on a 1 to 10 scale. So, yeah, it seems to be a common thing that, and anecdotally, you talk to any older athlete, they will always say, as I've gotten older, I feel like I take longer to recover.
Gosh, there is so much there. So both of those studies showed that physiologically there wasn't that much different between the young versus the masters, but the perception was that there were, that they felt sore and that they didn't recover as well. So, the logical thing is, what's driving that is that just the I don't know what the word is, the psychology around that I must be going to do this harder because I'm maturing? What's driving that?
Great question, and I do not know the answer. I certainly have felt that even when as a younger, when I say younger, I'm talking 50-year-old, when I was training for the Australian Ironman Triathlon titles up in Rockhampton, that I wasn't bouncing back when I started my training. I used to do things like 10, 800-metre runs, etc. in the wet, all those hardening up stuff on rainy days and, into the dark and all that stuff, which I used to believe gave me a bit of an edge over my competitors. But when I started feeling tired, physiologically I came good. So my perception going in was that I couldn't do this session, but then I was physiologically able to manage it. So whether it is just, I have this belief in my head, and older athletes may have this belief in their head that because they're older, they may not recover as quickly, and that explains the perception, or whether it is a neural, is it a feel that they've got, a perception that they've got through all their senses that they haven't recovered. But it's certainly there in terms of the research.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. It makes me think of one of Bernard Lagat's sort of practical share-ins when he featured on the show, and Bernard said he just doesn't let himself ever use the word old in his vocabulary. When he lines up for a training session with runners half of his age, he doesn't give himself permission that he might be struggling because of his age. So it's hard to quantify that in science, but there's got to be an element of that mindset.
Yeah, and in my PhD, I had the pleasure of working with a gentleman called Norm Gull-Branson. Norm was the Assistant Police Commissioner in the 70s in Queensland, and he was a 1956 Olympic torchbearer up in northern Queensland when he was a young policeman up there. And he was a high-performance distance runner, half-marathon, marathon runner. And he, when we talked, as you and I are talking, he had the same belief that I listen to my body, but I try not to let it dominate. I let once I start training tell me how hard I'm going to go. So if physiologically he wasn't able to perform in an interval session or a run, he'd slow down. He'd listen to his body, but he wouldn't be driven by how he started his session, his perception.
You're listening to Professor Peter Reaburn on this expert edition, sharing around all things maximising health and performance of the Masters athlete. Support for today's show comes from Kinesis Sunscreen. Kinesis is a range of sports performance sunscreens for your active lifestyle. Everything about the Kinesis Sunscreen range, from the ergonomic bottle to the ingredients they include and leave out of their formulas, have been developed specifically for athletes. Different to any sunscreen you've tried, and so light you won't feel you're wearing it. Kinesis Sunscreen is super easy to apply, won't affect your grip or sting your eyes. Kinesis can be bought through select retail partners in Canada, the USA and Australia, or online through their regional websites. Search Kinesis Active, that's KINESYS Active. And the team at Kinesis have offered a very generous 20% off the entire full range of spray and natural zinc sunscreens. Simply use the coupon code POGO, P-O-G-O, on your regional website. Enjoy staying active while staying sun protected with Kinesis Sunscreen. Support for today's show also comes from Pogo Physio's online telehealth consultations. If you are a runner or triathlete struggling with getting a running-related injury sorted, then look no further than a 45-minute telehealth session with myself as a senior sports physiotherapist or any of the team at Pogo Physio by simply jumping over to pogophysio.com.au/telehealth. Our aim is to help anyone who connects with us, whether interstate or overseas via telehealth, get back to their physical best and across what we call the physio finish line. For now, let's jump back with Professor Peter Reaburn on this expert edition, exploring all things maximising health and performance of the Masters athlete. Peter, one of the other things I found interesting in looking through some of your work, your literature, is the thermal tolerance, or the changes in the Masters athlete, their ability to deal with cooling of their body, their core temperature, and their thermal regulation. So what are some of the things that change, and any tips you'd give to the Masters athlete around this?
Yeah, great question, Brad. And I'm really enjoying the conversation, mate. It's a conversation that's relaxed, and critically you're engaged, and I can tell I'm talking with an athlete, and I really value that. They're high-end questions. I love it. The researchers can, again, I'm saying like an academic here, which I suppose I am, but research has conclusively shown that your ability to tolerate heat, thermal tolerance, is very much related to your VO2 max, your aerobic capacity. So if you are an older athlete that has got a high aerobic capacity, a high VO2 max, and generally that is related to performance. If you're a high-performance older athlete, your thermal tolerance, your ability to handle training in the heat will be the same as a young athlete with a similar VO2 max and similar performance. The sad thing is that in general, as we get older, both those things decline. So, it all becomes relative. We can still perform and manage heat quite well. But one thing that has been shown, and this is a bit of a cautious thing, that older people's their thirst mechanism, their ability to sense thirst, decreases. Now, for me, in an applied setting, that means make sure we prehydrate better than we may have as young athletes. So we've got some water, some fluid or sports drink in our system. And we are more focused on drinking during, and critically, because sports drinks with their sodium, potassium, magnesium, and the flavouring, I tend to use sports drinks more because the research has shown that taste and sodium in particular increase your desire to drink. So in older athletes, if that first mechanism is compromised, older athletes should be thinking more about sports drinks.
Gosh, really interesting, Peter. Prior featured expert edition, Dan Plews, PhD from Auckland, and current world age group Hawaii Ironman champion record holder, 8:24 in 2017. Dan shared exactly that, that it's important to start prehydrated, and that as if you to have a sports drink that makes it more palatable to drink more can certainly be a good tool to help an athlete try and not dehydrate as much as they otherwise might. So that's really interesting. And that link into the VO2 max, is that just because higher VO2 max means that you can produce more metabolic heat because you're working harder and therefore you're able to tolerate the heat, or what's the link there?
It seems to be more related to, in general, people with a high VO2 max have trained their heat loss mechanisms. So the heat loss mechanisms, the major one is sweat, not sweating, but the mechanism is evaporation. So we've got to get the sweat onto the skin surface for it to evaporate. So we can help a high VO2 max, and therefore, in general, intense training tends to have our sweat mechanism still is maintained, and critically blood flow to the skin maintained as a heat loss mechanism through convection and conduction.
Okay.
And radiation. Of course. Yeah.
So they're the mechanisms. Peter, protein synthesis rates, what could you share around what's happening there from a recovery point of view for the masters athlete?
This would be a big take-home message. And one of my very high-end PhD graduates, a gentleman called Tom Doring, Doering, if people want to look him up. Tommy was a gentleman who had a particular interest in older athletes and recovery, but also a strong bent leaning towards nutrition. So he helped one of the long-asked questions, do older athletes take longer to recover, and what can we do about it? And he showed through that downhill running and inducing muscle soreness and muscle damage in triathletes who then he did a downhill run in the morning, then they did a running session, a cycling time trial in the afternoon, He found that their perception of recovery was compromised compared to young athletes who did the same thing. But they also displayed significant muscle damage. Now, if we think of this logically, muscles are made up of, ultimately, the building blocks of protein and amino acids. The muscle fibres themselves, the connective tissue that's been damaged, requires protein. And he then did a second study and showed through saliva analysis that the older athletes' ability to, it's called the maximal fractional synthetic rate, their ability to take in a volume of protein in a bolus, in a fluid, and then turn it into body connective tissue, was compromised compared to the younger athletes. So the fractional synthetic rate in the older athletes was reduced there. They did not have the ability to take those amino acids and turn them into muscle. And therefore, the next study that he did was to let's increase the intake for recovery purposes of protein in the older athlete. So we effectively doubled the recommended 20 grams per day immediately after training, 20 grams of of protein, approximately a little can of tuna. Let's put it into real world. He doubled that in terms of a fluid that was taken in, and he found that their recovery was enhanced. The older athletes' recovery was enhanced. So the bottom line, in answer, a long way, Brad, to answer your question, older athletes need more protein to recover, particularly after muscle damaging, which generally equals intense training.
But interestingly, the ability to turn that ingested protein into, what it needs to be, muscles, etc., and repair mechanisms was hampered. But by increasing the amount, you can override that dampening of conversion.
Exactly, mate. So we make more available.
Okay, so make more available by having more.
Absolutely. And ideally in a fluid form, because let's think logically again, if it's in fluid form, it tends to be broken down already. And therefore it gets quicker from the gut into the blood, and therefore at the muscle and connective tissue damage level.
So consider it in a fluid form rather than
form.
Okay. And these are very practical, Peter, and this is so great to have that transition from science into practical takeaways. So this is brilliant. Peter, what would you say are the top 3 mistakes masters athletes make? It's a difficult one. There's so many, but what would be your top 3 mistakes? I'm
prepared for this, Brad. I had a feeling you might ask me something like this. And it's based on 55 years of training, competing, studying the research. It's, I think, too many older athletes train too hard too often. I think, again, it's individuals. I think there is no doubt a role for intensity. We talked about it earlier, with a caveat around if you're more at risk of cardiac issues because of that long history or a family history, training history that's long, hard, too often endurance training at high heart rates, reduce how often you train hard, listen to your body. Too much hard training too often leads to musculoskeletal and I'm going to suggest in the endurance athlete, cardiovascular issues. So, I think not enough older athletes, it's a mistake, but it's also a recommendation. Too many older athletes do not value weight training, resistance training, body weight training, and its impact on performance. And I think probably a third, and we didn't delve into this too much, is flexibility training. I don't think enough older athletes use flexibility and stretching. There's a big argument over before training, but in particularly after training and as a separate training session in front of the TV sitting at home, do a yoga session, do some Pilates, stretch. I don't see enough athletes. I'm going to add another one too, Brad.
Go for it, fourth.
A fourth one. I'm going to say not enough athletes use recovery strategies. They are not using protein. And we've got a little study published in 2013 at the American College of Sports Medicine conference in Indianapolis, that we showed that older athletes do not use recovery strategies as much as younger athletes, either from training recovery strategies or from competition. Use the recovery strategies that research has shown work. Stretching, protein, carbohydrate intake, compression garments, hot, cold.
And the interesting thing about not using those recovery strategies is yet the perception of recovery, as you shared earlier, is that the Masters athletes recovering poorer, even though physiologically the difference isn't as stark as they might perceive. Yet the uptake of recovery strategies is less. Is that just ignorance? And that's not a criticism of ignorance in that sense, or is it just time constraints? What do you think it might be?
Oh, I definitely think time constraints is one factor. We've got work, we've got family, we're typically pushed for time. I think that's one. But I also think in older athletes have been at it for years. Mate, I've never used it in the past. I'll be right. I don't need it now.
Have you observed a shift over your 55 years of competing in academia to more acceptance of recovery as a key tool, both at the pointy end of sport and also the recreational end?
Oh, there's absolutely no doubt, Brad. The science is there. The marketing is there now. All your big nutrition firms are pushing the value of recovery. Compression garments are shown to work. And they're pushing that science out there. Yeah, there's no doubt older athletes and younger athletes are far more informed, and I think it's helping to contribute. If we recover harder, we're more likely to be able to bounce back and train harder. It's smart.
And I love prior featured expert, one of your academic colleagues, Shona Halson, Dr. Shona Halson, who's just simply summed it up. The only training you're benefiting from is the training you're recovering from. So, go figure, right?
Mate, I tell you, all the names you're mentioning, I'm feeling very privileged to be involved with this. You have definitely attracted some of the highest level people, athletes and sports scientists, into your program. Well done, you.
Oh, thanks, Peter. We try and keep the quality content as high as we can. Peter, we didn't touch on injury profile, and before we wrap with the final couple of questions here, is there anything you would want listeners to know around the injury profile of a Masters athlete?
It's interesting. There's not that much research, and I know you have an active interest in this space. In fact, we're very close to publishing a paper together, which I'm very pleased about. Very little research specifically around younger versus older rates of injury. If we take all sports, they don't seem to be too much different in terms of the rates of injury. What has been shown is that where the injuries occur tend to occur more in the lower body. And by the way, I'm taking out Achilles tendinopathy because I know it's one of your pets here, and that very little research is supporting that there's an age relation there. But certainly joint sprains, strains, lower limb injuries tend to occur more in the older athlete than the younger athlete. So again, for me, it's the role of resistance training, light plyometrics, a mixed methods training modality that is lending support to let's get that lower body musculature and the core stronger and more resilient, and all the benefits. So, it's where the injuries are occurring. Seems to be in the older athlete, more the lower body.
Yeah, and there's nuances across team sports and individual pursuits like running, but the takeaways are the lower limbs.
Absolutely.
We are thrilled to be hosting former featured expert, father of polarised training, none other than Dr. Stephen Seiler, for an upcoming 2-hour live stream event in July. The theme for the event, sustainable training for attainable endurance goals. During this 2-hour live stream, Dr. Seiler will explore across 4 sessions the following: intensity distribution for long-term performance development, interval training, research and practical applications, periodization and peaking, and training monitoring to support the process. The live stream is ideal for coaches, athletes, health and medical professionals, fitness professionals, and students of the sports, health and exercise sciences. Tickets are $49 and available over at pogophysio.com.au/Dr. Seiler live stream. Peter, if you could boil, it's a very difficult question, everything you've learnt across your 55 years of exposure to competing, lifelong interest in competition as a masters athlete, your academic pursuits, into one piece of advice to help listeners of this show, specifically masters athletes, perform at their physical best, what would it be?
Listen to your body.
Oh, gosh. Listen to your body. Is that all you've got?
I think it's so important, and older athletes are generally in tune, particularly if they've trained for a long period. They know what works. They'll feel a niggle. They'll feel something not right. They'll feel they haven't recovered. They need to reflect on why. Why did that occur? What did I do yesterday or the day before? Have I loaded too much? Have I not recovered smart? Have I got too much stress in my life that it's contributing? But yeah, listen to your body. And I think probably, Brad, weight training and intensity of training in moderation would be, if that's what you're looking for, would be a key message.
Oh, look, I love listening to your body. And finally, Peter, every guest of the show issues listeners with a physical challenge for the week. So what is Professor Peter Reaburn's physical challenge going to be?
I'm in it right now. I'm every day this week, and for the next couple of weeks, I'm in a 25 push-ups, 25 single leg squats, and 25 sit-ups, bent knee sit-ups challenge.
Brilliant.
Every day for 25 days.
25 push-ups, 25 single leg squats, 25 sit-ups for 25 days. Professor Peter Reaburn's 25 challenge. Brilliant. And finally, Peter, if listeners want to engage with you, find out more about your work, where can we direct them?
Mate, I have a blog/website which has been very undernourished, and when I retire in July, I'll be nourishing it, and it's simply mastersathlete.com.au. www. Of course, a website, mastersathlete, all one word, .com.au, and you can see what I'm about, and it's all about trying to bring the science of sport to older athletes, as you are doing so well here today.
Look, thank you for your time, Peter, your contribution to this space, and I think more than ever it matters so much. So thank you for your time.
It's been fun and very stimulating. Thank you.
So there you have it, another episode of the Physical Performance Show, and I trust you took some great learnings from Professor Peter Reaburn. We really have been on the Masters Athlete theme, and I hope this was a nice follow-on from Cam Brown's sharings last week. A huge thank you to those doing podsies. That's a screenshot of the episode you're enjoying at any given point in time, and simply tagging in the show on your social media feed at Physical Performance Show, and/or including myself at Brad_Beer. Huge thank you also to those leaving ratings and reviews for the Physical Performance Show over on iTunes. It's a cinch. You can do it from your laptop, mobile, or any device. Simply jump over to iTunes, search for the Physical Performance Show, and rate and review away. Honestly, the feedback through channels like iTunes reviews and podsies really is rocket fuel to keep the show coming out each and every week. So massive, massive thanks. If you know someone in your world who would benefit from Professor Reaburn's sharings today, please go ahead and share the episode with them. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you've been enjoying the show. That's simple, from whatever device that you're enjoying the show from. The episodes go live each and every Thursday evening, and subscribing just ensures that the episodes will land in your earbuds each and every week. Big thank you to the three very good folk who make the Physical Performance Show possible each and every week. Daryl Misson, our audio engineer, Susan Wilkin on all things show administration, and Matthew Walding on all things show graphic design. Another huge thank you to today's show sponsor, Kinesis Sunscreen. This is the sunscreen that I train with, and it's the best sunscreen solution I've found across 25 years plus of competing in endurance sports. Don't forget, the Kinesis team have offered a very generous 20% off the full range of spray and natural zinc sunscreens by jumping over to your regional Kinesis Active website. If you're interested in taking your performance to the next level, then don't miss out on registering for the July 18th Dr. Stephen Seiler live stream Sustainable Training for Attainable Endurance Goals. Jump over to pogophysio.com.au/Dr. Seiler live stream. Now, coming up on the Physical Performance Show, we have a real treat for the endurance sporting fans. Next week, we'll share with you the first of two parts of an extended recording I recently did with the younger brother of the Brownlee brothers, UK-based triathlon stars, Alistair and Johnny Brownlee. That's right, Johnny Brownlee will be featuring the silver medalist from the Rio Olympic Games triathlon and the bronze medalist from the 2012 London Olympic Games triathlon. This is a rare insight into Johnny's highs, lows, and many, many learnings. Following Johnny Brownlee's highs, lows, and learnings, stay tuned for more treats by way of Australian swimming superstar Michael Klim and founder of Training Peaks, the world's biggest online data marketplace, best-selling author of the Cyclists and Triathletes Training Bibles, none other than Joe Friel. So until next week, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.